Hello, everybody. I'm Mehul Harry, the DevExpress Web Product Manager. Welcome to How to Create a Powerful ASP.NET MVC Web Application. Now, the new DevExpress Clinical Trial Demo app is loaded with a lot of functionality. And in this webinar, we're going to take a look at how we built it using MVC, our extensions, and we're going to do a deep dive into what it takes to create a powerful MVC web application and how we achieved it using DevExpress MVC, along with a lot of existing frameworks and methodologies and patterns to really create a powerful application. So the first thing is, let's take a look at the actual application. Now, to see it, we're going to go to, you can just go to devexpress.com. That's the best place to start. And from here, if you go to training demos, you'll find all of the different training demos that we have for ASP.NET Web Forms, MVC, and SharePoint. So we're going to go to Run MVC Demos, and this will bring us to devexpress.demos.com/MVC, or you can also go to mvc.devexpress.com, which also redirects you here. Now, on this page, you'll find all the information about how it's cross-browser compliant, there's a rich client side, and really, I believe this set of MVC extensions, which there's about over 45 of them actually, they're native MVC extensions, they produce lightweight semantic rendering, they're powered by jQuery, and we have a set of featured demos that we show off, and one of them is this clinical study. Now this was released in the last major version, which came out a couple of months ago, and what essentially it is, and it's important to understand that it's what's called a vertical demo, that it was created for a particular vertical market. And if you happen to be in the clinical trial market, then you will find this is perfect. But if you don't, and if you're like me who haven't participated in a clinical trial or actually administered one, it may seem a little bit foreign to you. But it's actually quite fascinating. And what's more interesting as developers is we'll see today how we go from learning about a sort of a business and how to incorporate that into a really powerful application, but also one that makes use of all the benefits of MVC as well as good user design. So to start with, the philosophy behind this, well, let's start with the idea. The idea originally came because we had hired a couple of developers who had actually worked on a large-scale, massive MVC application that did a clinical trial. And so what we're going to see today does 1/100th of what that major application did. But the idea is that it shows off all the major features that could happen in such a business. And in a clinical trial, what happens is there is a trial for essentially a new drug that the doctors or pharmacies want to test out. And so what they do is they find participants, volunteers who are willing to be part of this study. And to do that, it takes a rigorous sort of scientific approach to make sure that the results are actually accurate. So what happens is there's two roles. There are two essential roles. And in this clinical study, that's what we're highlighting. So there's two things you can do on this demo. You can either be the doctor or the supervisor. Now the doctor is the person or the role that allows you to make changes and so forth. So we're going to start there. And a supervisor is somebody who's administering the clinical trial. So the very first thing is when you click on an icon, you'll see that it gives you not just a nice icon for an avatar for the person logging in, but also gives you some password field. Now because this is a demo, we didn't really want to hamper you and put in an actual password check. So this password's not really hooked up, but it does work, and we'll see that in just a minute. By the way, we're going to be diving into this solution in just a little bit, but let's just first take a look at the UI. So the very first thing we're presented, let me put this in full screen mode so we can see this better. The very first thing we're presented is, if you are a doctor, these are the main things you can do. You can add a new patient for a study, you can look at the visits that you have, and queries. And so let's break this down. As a doctor, a clinical study essentially means that your job is to get in patients, give them the study, but also find out how it is going for them. Make sure that, A, they're okay, if they have any issues. And so what you do is you set up visits with them. So there's the initial visit of, are they okay? Are they even eligible? to be part of the study. And then there'll be like another third day or a 10th day visit. So you schedule different visits with the patients. And queries are something that come in from the supervisor of the study. So as a doctor, you're reporting back all this data. Your job is to produce the data. And the supervisor is the one who's looking at this data. So as a doctor, you may add a new patient and say, okay, well, I found somebody. So let's add somebody new. I'll add somebody called, let's say, Jeff, and we'll make sure they're enrolled. Not all of these are necessary, but just to show you, I will pick some random numbers and click Edit. Now, the very first thing is, as soon as we enter this information, this new patient, you noticed right away that it gave me a new set of tabs. So this UI also changes. So what happens is, when you enter a new patient, you're automatically, first thing your ability to do is enter in 3 visits. And we chose randomly. Now, really, in a real trial, you could have hundreds of visits, right? You could have a lot of visits, but we just chose 3 for the sake of this demo. So you have the baseline one, which allows you to grab information. Now, each bit of information here is given to the patient as a questionnaire. Now, what's interesting for me is that a lot of this was new to me. You'll see this concept of what's called CRF, or I'll put in clinical. And what that basically means is it stands for case report form. And essentially, it's just a paper or electronic questionnaire that they enter. So each one of these is a CRF, or it's considered a CRF. So it could be a demographics or vitals, where we take their blood temperature, heart rate, et cetera, and figure out, hey, they're valid or not. And then they'll go on to a further one. So maybe in a future visit, you have first day and then finally 10th day. Now, I want to explain this business logic in this demo, and I will take your questions afterwards, by the way, but let's hold off on that. So what I want to show is each one of these UIs has a particular interesting feature for it. Now, for example, here in this CRF, we've made sure that, we've got some validation built in, right? And I did mention this is the MVC extension, MVC website. And on top of that, you'll see there's a particular nice, clean look to this. This feels very clean, feels very light. The colors are soft. And we had developed a special theme just for this demo, which I'll show you is reusable in other MVC applications we're using DevExpress extensions. So what's interesting here is that we've leveraged things like our tabs and so forth. We can look as a doctor, they can move around, so navigation is quite interesting as well. You've got the main menu here for the inactive and active patients. You can go around and look at your different patients. And there's some really interesting items here as well that we've put in. For example, let's say in this vital CRF, this data goes back to the supervisor. So we told them, hey, they were the actual time, the height, weight, temperature. And it's in Celsius, but what happens is there's a little red mark to this. So for some reason, the supervisor was curious about this, and if we click on it, the supervisor had asked, question about the temperature. Please specify the reason for the reduced body temperature. And as a doctor, they can put in something like, they were cold, or something like that. And when we hit reply, now this data goes directly back to the supervisor, so when they log in, they'll have this information as well. And we have this interactivity, and now you'll notice that check mark was changed back, the exclamation was changed back to a check mark to let us know. And all of these nice little user design features have been built right into this site using DevExpress MVC extensions. All right, so let's log out of here real quick. Well, before we do, let's take a look at a couple other screens. We've got the schedule visit, which lets the doctor know, and he can use this navigation, you can use this one. So we've also wanted to make this friendly enough to move around easily into it. But the schedule visits let this doctor know what his visits are for the day. So he knows there's a subject coming in with the initial CE, it's their 10th day visit, and it's not quite complete yet. And finally, it also shows the queries that they have on their plate. So, for example, this lets them see all their total queries that have been answered and unanswered that they can respond to. All right, so let's log out and let's look at the supervisor real quick before we dive right into the code. So in the supervisor role, what they can do essentially is get an overall view of how the study is going and how that data is going. So the doctor role, we essentially made it responsible for all the data entry stuff. And this supervisor role is more for a analytical role. So this is the kind of information you would present, let's say, on a dashboard, where you want to give them a quick view or detailed view or master detailed view where they can dive in deeper. And so this also leverages all the DevExpress products as well, MVC products, things like our charts. So what's really interesting here is this gives them a quick view to see what the patient's progress is. How many patients are enlisted in this in a particular study, and what level they're at. So are they at baseline, first day, have they completed? And if there was an adverse event, and an adverse event is, let's say they are on one of the clinical trials and one of the drugs that they're testing give them an adverse effect. Maybe they got a headache or something like that, and they had an extra visit to the doctor that wasn't planned. So they can see how many of those are there as well, see if they're red flag indicators. So here, what the supervisor can do and say, okay, well, I can see there's a few adverse events, there's a few baseline events, there's a lot of first day events. So let's dive into the first day events. And when they click on that particular piece of the chart, it lets them go right into the first day patients by clinic. And so we can see that the Orlando clinic has quite a bit of first day patients. And now it gives the supervisor a view of which doctors at the Orlando clinic have the most first day patients. And it looks like Dr. Davis is really recruiting a lot of first day patients, or maybe he just has a lot of first day appointments to get through. But this type of information is vital for the supervisor role, who's keeping track of which ones to keep track of and which not to. So the unfinished CRFs, excuse me one second. The unfinished CRFs are essentially unfinished case report files. So this lets them know that, hold on one second. This lets them know that the certain clinics have more unfinished RFs and what type of case reports those are. So for example, here we have St. Petersburg University Hospital has the most unfinished for vitals. So this might be a red flag for me to call St. Petersburg and say, hey, listen, Dr. Davis has a lot of vitals that he's not finishing. So either find out why or call Dr. Davis and say, Dr. Davis, if you still want to participate in this study, we need you to make sure that this is being answered. Okay, and then this other view says open queries, shows how many open queries there are. So these are queries the supervisor has made to that particular hospital and which ones have not been answered. So that way he can also find out whether to keep using that hospital and keep using that clinic and doctor per se. Now, we also have, so as you notice, we have a couple of navigation menus. When I click this icon, which is generally the internet standard for going back to the home, this brings me back to my main view. And so I can click this, or I can click different analytics. But what this now brings me up is the pivot grid. Now, we have an MVC pivot grid. I believe we were probably the first to produce an MVC pivot grid, but it's very powerful, and it shows you things like, it shows the supervisor things like which doctors, show the most change in happiness by race and gender per clinic. And so, in fact, I can even bring in clinic into this data, and so this way now I can say, well, the Cofer clinic has quite a bit. It has a total of 37% versus, let's reduce this, versus Dobson, who, by doctor has different info. So it's really a quick way to glance or maybe dive deeper into the data, and it allows the end user, in this case the supervisor, to figure out, okay, which doctors are doing good and which aren't. So let's say I'll break it down by just 2 doctors. And it seems like the happiness change is quite a bit higher with Dr. Gray than with Dr. Brown. So it lets them also see which doctors have the most adverse events happen and what intensity levels they were. So some may be mild, some may be moderate, but this type of information from a glance is what's vital to figure out whether a drug is going to be successful or not, and what the supervisor needs to do in his role or her role to keep this trial moving forward. And finally, and we also have reports. Now, this integrates our reporting product called Extra Reports, which also gives them the list of patients, and in a master detail view, you can see what their progress has been like per visit. And there's also a queries report that shows all the open queries. So maybe I can print this out to read, let's say, on a train while I'm going home or something like that, or maybe send it off to some of the clinics and say, hey, listen, some of these queries haven't been answered. Please get with the doctors to have them answer these queries. And finally, they have the managed clinics, which lets them see in a master detail grid view, MVC grid view, what the patients are per clinic. So I can see that the St. Mary's Hospital has the most number of doctors, and I'm sorry, not patients, the list of doctors per clinic. So I can see that at Johnson's, there's a Dr. Rivera, what his login is, and what his role might be, and how many patients he might have, and so forth. So that gives us an overall view of what this website does. Now let's dive in. So if you have DevExpress 12.1 installed, you'll find this demo. Yeah, you can find it under DevExpress 12.1. Now, the very first thing you generally see when you run DevExpress is you'll have this demo center that comes up. Now, in this demo center, what we'd like to present to you is all the featured demos. Now, these ones at the top are just amazing demos we worked on. They're full-on apps. We have had some customers who've taken them and made their own versions based off of these apps, and we fully welcome that. So in here, you can see this clinical study. If you click this, this will run a local version of the site we just saw. Now, what I recommend is you can find these demos, all of our demos, all of the online demos that you see on our website are available locally, every one of our platforms. So if you go to C, Users, under Public, and under Public Documents, you'll find DevExpress 12.1 demos. This is where we put all of our demos. Now, we put them under Public just because of, so that the IIS development server can access them. So under DevExpress 12.1 demos, under ASP.NET, under Common, you will find C# and VB. Now I have to apologize, we only have a C# version of this demo. But I think you'll find that it's fairly easy to read the code into it. Maybe not read the code, but to take the concepts from the C# version, maybe create a VB version if you'd like to. Now, the first thing is you'll see there are several folders here that relate just to clinical study. Now, we didn't put them in their own subfolder just because what happens is it is all one solution, but it was just quite necessary to have them all together in this folder. Excuse me. Now, the place to start is under clinicalstudy.site, and I'll explain what each one of those folders are in just a minute. So under here, you'll find there is a clinical study solution. Now, we built this with Visual Studio 2010, so if you open this in VS 2012, it may tell you that, hey, I need to upgrade and so forth. So what you want to do is the first thing is that you can go to Open Project and go to that folder in Public Documents, DevExpress.1, ASP.NET, Common, C#, and I'm going to open the Clinical Study Site folder and open this solution. Now, I've already upgraded this solution, so you'll see that it's meaning that it's already going to load them. And we'll step through these folders. And I'll show you where you can find info about these folders as well. Anytime you have a question about DevExpress, one thing I always like to mention is that if you go to Help, or even better yet, Search, in this case, I'm going to look up clinical under documentation. Right now, and one of the goals is this video is going to help serve as a guiding principle for what is possible with this clinical study demo. Because right now, I'll show you in documentation, we only have a limited amount of info. So if you, let's find it under help. Clinical RWS specifics. Now, this document you'll find describes what the folder structure is, but there's a lot more to this project than just a folder structure. So here we have what we call, there's essentially 6 folders. There's the demo data, which is really for internal purposes, and we included it just because, you know, we have a lot of customers who are curious about how we do something. And this demo actually runs in 2 roles, meaning that when you run it locally, it's going to run against a SQL Express database, and when it runs on our web server, it runs against an in-memory database, because while we allow you to change variables in session, in an ASP.NET session, we refresh that data when somebody new logs in, so that way you have a way to play with it, but not make any long-term lasting changes into the data. And then there's domain model, model builder, repositories, sites, and theme assembly, which I'll talk about in just a second. Okay, so let's talk about the different folders. So the very first one I mentioned is there is the demo data. I don't really recommend it too much. If you're interested in it, you can take a look at it. And as I mentioned, you know, we just didn't drop it because, you know, like I said, sometimes looking at code is interesting. And that's one of the purposes for this demo today, is that looking at a solution and not necessarily, you know, studying larger projects, more complex projects can be very interesting to see how you can take such an approach and use some good patterns like that in your own applications. And I'm hoping that's what this studying this application will help you do today. So the very first thing is I want to talk about what the dependencies are in this project. So I'm going to right click on the solution, and if I take a look at manage NuGet packages for solution, it's going to show me a list of NuGet packages that are in here. Now, on first glance, this may seem a little daunting, but don't worry, it's not too bad. ASP.NET MVC as a framework, you've heard, is really quite wonderful for allowing you to do things like unit testing and so forth. Now, it's completely possible to use similar patterns in a non-MVC application, in WebForms or something, but MVC tends to be a little bit more geared to it because originally when it was designed, they had these type of concepts in mind for you to leverage. So the first thing is, you'll see that we've used what's called Castle Windsor. Now, Castle Windsor, as it says, is a best of version, mature inversion of control container. What that basically means is it allows you to do dependency injection. And I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. And so we used a dependency injection pattern to, an inversion of control pattern to set up how this project essentially works. Now, there tends to be a little bit more code, but you find in the long run, this has benefits overall for your solution. And then we've also leveraged Entity Framework. Now, there's a lot of ORMs, including our own, that you can use, XPO. We used Entity Framework because A, it's matured quite a bit, and just to show you, because there's a lot of push from Microsoft in terms of using Entity Framework with MVC. So we just wanted to show you, our customers, how you can leverage any essentially ORM with our MVC extensions. Now, Modernizer, you'll find, is in a lot of MVC and not in a lot of ASP.NET project templates. And essentially, it's very small classes that help you leverage CSS3 and HTML5 in older browsers that may not support it. It does what's called sort of a shim to add a sort of a particular piece of code or an HTML element into older browsers like IE6 to help you leverage HTML5 elements. And this solution is an HTML5 element, as you'll see. And then we also have a mocking library. So what a mocking library is essentially is a way that lets you talk to data without actually talking to a database. It's mock data, and it's a great way to do testing. And finally, we used NUnit, which probably is the most popular unit testing framework out there. So the great thing is these are all available via NuGet. You can use this NuGet's package manager or the console. And what's interesting is you don't have to worry about having these packages installed. When you open the solution, what will happen is Visual Studio will actually go out and grab these for you. For example, if you go to Manage NuGet Packages, and if you look at your settings, under General, if you have this checkbox, it's actually going to go and download the missing packages when it runs on a build. So let's close this. All right, now let's start from model, because as I mentioned, we used the Entity Framework. Now, Entity Framework, and we used a code-first approach, which basically means we first made our models. We wrote them via code. We didn't start from the database, and what that means is that we essentially identified that, hey, in this clinical trial, we have things like a patient, we have a clinic, we identified our base entities, and in this case, these are simply what's called POCOs, plain old CLR objects. So, for example, you see they all derive from base entity. And if I look at base entity, all it has is simply, it's just a public class with one property called ID. And we kept it simple and let Entity Framework do all the heavy lifting. But this essentially sets up the model for how it talks to the database. But you'll see, you don't actually see any code in here for talking to the backend. And then we have what's called model builders. Now, model builders is where the business logic lies. So the model essentially is very light. We didn't put a whole lot of data in there. And this goes back to one of the benefits of MVC, which is separation of concerns. So one of the concerns is that, hey, we separate out the logic somewhere else. And you'll see in here, we've got things like when we first create a patient on its constructor, you'll see that, hey, we add 3 visits. Now, it could be more, it could be less. But in essence, this type of logic decisions are put inside of model builders. And then we have what's called repositories. So as I mentioned, the demo sets up, the demo folder sets up the data, but in the repositories, repositories essentially is another pattern, but it's a way for you to talk to the backend. So the repository pattern allows you to say, to talk to the data, any data. It's another level of abstraction. So you talk to a repository. Now this makes it easier for when you want to change your backends. And for us, this was important because one of the key reasons we use dependency injection and inversion control is because we wanted good unit testing coverage. And the way to do that is we wanted to make sure that we can do proper testing without touching the database. And that's by using mock data. And so what we did was this repository pattern lets us do just that. It lets us talk to a repository without letting us actually know what that repository is. It could be in memory, it could be an interface, it could be an Entity Framework, it could be actual data, but it allows us to abstract that layer out, and it's a better design because also it allows our classes to be smaller. So as you saw, these classes are very small and light. And this follows what's known as the solid principle. And if you're not familiar with it, I recommend taking a look at it. Let's just take a look real quick. Now, you'll see that, oops, not that solid. The object-oriented version of solid. And if you look at I'll put these links in in a blog post as well. Julian Bucknall, our CTO, has some great blog posts about solid. I'll have to find it for you. I'll put it in a blog post afterwards. But the idea is, solid is an acronym. So it stands for, S stands for single responsibility, O is for open close, list-off substitution, interface segregation, and lastly, the D stands for dependency inversion. They all have their own meanings. You can dive deeper into them. And like I said, the goal of this webinar, I can't really dive into and show you how to do dependency inversion, but we're going to sort of walk through and how it makes sense in this, and I think you'll see that it's not too hard to leverage within our own applications. Okay, so that's what the repository pattern does. It allows us to have two different repositories, one for online, which we use the memory one for, and one for local, where we use the entity framework to allow full editing. And as I mentioned, we are also leveraging NUnit in a lot of these. So you'll see there's also a test project. Now, this are the tests that we do for the unit testing that we do for the different sites. So we have one for the repositories, where we check things like connection strings and so forth, and then we have this other one to test the different controllers or different models. So in this case, I can in fact bring up the patient controller, and if I wanted to, I can run the test on it. And what that'll do is run the test and make sure that we're either red or green, and allow us to move forward. So let's move on. And we also have a themes folder. Now, as I mentioned, for this project, we created a new theme. And this theme is great because you can actually leverage it. I'm thinking about maybe doing a blog post on how to pull this, but the idea is pretty straightforward. Excuse me. You'll see that in the web config, generally to define a DevExpress theme, you simply tell it what the theme is. And in this case, we've set the themes property to the clinical study theme. So the great news is, the help documentation that you'll find on help.devexpress is valid, meaning so that you can set things like what the theme is. So in fact, if you create your own theme, like Bob's, theme, you can also set that value here as well and go ahead and change this. And we in fact have a theme editor for it as well, which you can find under Tools, and it's called the XPX Theme Builder. All right, so that's great. And without diving in too much on the themes, let's look at the main site. So the main site is clinicalstudy.site, and this is built off of all of these other items, right? And this is how a good application is usually done, right? We have our layers, we have our models layer, we have our testing layer, we have our themes layer, and now the main site, it leverages and builds on top of all of that, so we have all the proper abstractions and so forth. And so what I'll start with here is the base views. Now, you'll find in the base views there isn't a whole lot, because this isn't where those two roles exist. And there's a feature of MVC that we're leveraging that I think also helps you to separate out logically and even hierarchically in a project, to keep your sanity of what the views mean in each. We're going to take a look at that just a minute. So in the views, you'll see that you have things like the users, right? The login information. So there's the default one for login, and there's some info for older browsers and for error pages and so forth. So if you're really interested, you'll see that under shared, there's the default layout, and then there's the logged in users layout. This tends to actually be the main one that we use. And you'll see that this one essentially it just sets in a place where the main content gets generated. But that's standard MVC stuff, so let's not dive into too much. So the key feature and the key area where most of the UI is done is under areas. Areas is an MVC feature that allows you to separate hierarchically in a project different views. So, and you can even refer to them as analytics dot and data capture dot. So analytics, as I mentioned, is the one view for the supervisors, and data capture is the one for the doctors. Now, as you've kind of noticed, all through this project, we identified early on what the roles were, what the purpose was for each one of the views. And this makes it easier at design time when you're actually creating not just the look of the site, but how the site is going to feel, what the experience is going to be like. And so that also comes down to the code. So we can logically separate out, what these views are meant to do and what kind of access to data they have, what kind of looks they'll have, what kind of extensions we'll use on them. So I highly recommend early on identifying that process. Okay, so let's take a look at analytics. Now, the first thing is you'll notice under this site, you see a models folder. And you might be wondering, well, we went through all this trouble to make our domain models. What are these models? Now, these are what's called view models. A view model essentially says, listen, under analytics, the supervisor, yes, he has access to a lot of data, but he may not have access to all the data. And what a view model does, it says, I'm going to define a subset of the main model that gives access to this view. Because the view, again, this is separation concerns, another MVC paradigm that says you should only give access that particular view access to the data that it needs to, and not everything. And what's interesting about this is when you separate this out, it helps you when you're debugging, because it says, well, I only gave this a view which has access to 5 fields, only 5 fields. So that way it cannot, there's less for you to consider and thinking like, okay, is this data that is causing the issue? Is it something else? It's really a nice feature of MVC, or actually ASP.NET in general. So we'll see under analytics, we have the separate controllers for the different views that we have. And we also have these views. Now under here, we separated out the particular views in our different folders for administration that shows the clinics and so forth. So we can take a look under clinics. We have, and if you take a look at any of the MVC videos that I've done in the past, this is akin to the same thing. The only difference you may see here is that it may call a different layout, but you'll see that we have essentially the same setup. So the grid view, which does callbacks, is put inside of a separate partial view, and that partial view is then being called by the main view. All right, and so you'll see that in each one of these we have what we're leveraging some quite interesting items. So the pivot grid, you'll see is very straightforward in terms of how we're setting it up, and you can find the code for a lot of these. And I want to make sure that I save room for your questions. So let's dive into the dashboard. And you'll see the dashboard essentially is leveraging a lot of different items, right? And the dashboard essentially should show things like, hey, listen, here's your patients per visit, here's the happiness change, and so forth. And you can see we're not doing anything special other than just using HTML5 and just setting up some different divs and using, let's say, CSS to separate out those views. And if you take a look under reports, we are essentially just leveraging the report data items and using our DevExpress report extension, MVC extension to display them. Oops, hang on one second. Okay, so one of the last things I want to talk about is dependency injection and the mocking that I mentioned earlier. Now, I'm going to give you sort of a quick overview of it and to show you what could be interesting about it. As you'll notice that, by the way, I brought up our MVC extension, and I also brought up the report. And what's great is this is the report designer. And this designer, actually, you can even enable this so that the end user can manage these reports. But as you'll notice that I can actually edit this report right through this online system. All right, so let's close these reports. Okay, let's take a look at dependency injection. Now, I mentioned that we are using what's called inversion control. We chose Castle Windsor. There's a lot of inversion control dependency injection frameworks out there. Structure Map, Ninject, you name it. You could probably write your own if you wanted. But for us, what we wanted to show you is because DevExpress is at the user interface level, this doesn't matter to us. You can use essentially anything. And you'll find if you go to ASP.NET website from Microsoft, Scott Hanselman has a list of them. But if you go to the Microsoft site, you'll find that they have actually a good overview of how to walk through this pattern and why it makes sense. Um, so this diagram is actually kind of interesting. So typically we have a class and a couple of services that the class might call. And so there's the direct interaction and direct dependency between this setup. And this is how we typically do it. We create a class that says, hey, talk to the data, and so forth. Um, so, um, and if you like, you can see that, this Scott actually wrote this back in 2008, so this actually has probably grown since even then. But yeah, there's everything from Castle-Windsor, Structure Maps, Spring.net, AutoFac, Unity. I believe Unity is one of the Microsoft ones. But like I said, they're all good. You pick the one that you like, and the best way to figure that out is, hey, try a couple of them. We just chose Castle-Windsor actually because maybe it wasn't. It's one of the more popular ones, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's the most popular. But the idea is that it doesn't matter. For us, it all works the same. Okay. But the concept is that, and this probably explains it well. Let's look at dependency injection. There's a pretty good example on Wikipedia that explains it, right? So a design pattern that says allows a component to run at runtime component, blah, blah, blah. But it's a way to load plugins dynamically and to choose mock objects, right? But what it does is it changes it from it changes the dependency, and it puts the onus on somebody else. So let's take a look exactly at our for example, our controller. Now, in here, in the patient controller, in the past, what we might have done is we said, okay, here's the patient. And when we create the patient, we need to also be able to get the data about the patient, right? Because, hey, it's the patient. So this might look weird and foreign to you, but let's take a look. All it's essentially doing is saying, listen, what I need is a user repository, patient repository, some demographic info, and I need to figure out how to create this patient, right? Is there some business logic? And this is very different than going, hey, this.new equals new patient, right? Because if we did that, now we have a direct dependency on that patient. But now what we've done by doing this is we said, hey, there are interfaces that we need. But nowhere in here do you see something that says new. We're not newing up anything. And what the difference means is now we're saying that there's an interface out there. So now this controller is requesting that it needs these items. And so it's going to the interface. Now the interface, if we take a look at that, I'll hit F12, all it knows is, hey, there's a interface here and it provides two things, get user by login and get the main doctor. But where exactly is this interface developed? Well, let's take a look. And if we go to our domain model, if we go to our repositories, we'll find our interfaces. So if we look under iPatient repository, we've got, we've got the iPatient repository that implements the actual interface, right? So it doesn't implement the interface. This declares the interface. And then if we look in the entity framework, what we'll find is the actual class that declares that. So this says now we're getting down to typically what we do know, right? Because generally we would start here and then we would new up this class and so forth. But here what you'll see is that this is the actual patient repository class that extends this interface, right? And so this interface, when we're calling on it, doesn't actually, we don't know when we're in the controller that this class exists. All we know is there's a patient repository and it implements a couple of items. But that class is actually existing out somewhere else. The framework, Castle-Windsor, is the one that is taking care of this for us. Now, you'll see here it says Windsor Controller Factory. What it's actually doing, it is replacing the controller structure inside of .NET. And so what's great about it is Castle Windsor is the one that says, oh, they've hit patient repository, there's an interface out there, let me go figure out what the actual class is, new it up, give it to them. And by what we did there is essentially we flipped from a dependency into we flipped the role, and now Castle Windsor is the one saying, okay, somebody's requesting this, let me give it to them. And by doing this, it allows us that solid principle of making a single responsibility, but that inversion of control really allows you to do better unit testing, to test against mock data. There's a lot of benefits to it. But as you saw, it does take a little bit more of an initial setup, but there's some long-term benefits, especially in a large application. When you've got a large, massive application, like this application is, you want to make sure that that you've got real separation of concerns and you're able to truly leverage this. All right, so that's the long and the short of it, but you get the concept here that the key business logic and the key dependencies are not the responsibility of the user level. So the clinical study site is where the user interface is essentially done, and this is where you want to be concerned with things like, hey, how am I going to make the DevExpress MVC extension look? But as far as the data and how you talk to the model and so forth in MVC, if you can use any dependency injection framework. We chose Windsor in here, and if you like, you can step through all of these items. You can use them. You can use a theme. But what it really does, it shows you, and I'm hoping that you got a good idea here that you can leverage this with our MVC extensions, because really at the interface level, we want to help you be looking good for the end user. We want to provide that powerful functionality that you saw in this demo here, so that if you are asking yourself, well, how do we get a great pivot grid? It's very easy to add. As you saw, our pivot grid is just connecting to data. Now there is one other thing I want to show you that's really an interesting feature of our MVC application. I'm sorry, our MVC products. If we take a look at the editors, in fact, let's create a new patient. We'll call this FD, enrolled, save it. Now, if we go to baseline and I say save on these vitals, you'll notice that right away I got validation. And what's great is this is based off of model validation. I didn't custom write this. What happened is that we said at the model level that A, this is a required field, and B, if it's not inputted, then it should be, if it's not inputted, it should be bubbled up to the user interface level. Now if we go back, and I'll just do a quick search here. Okay, so let's take a look at site, areas, views, patients, and we'll take a look at, I'm sorry, not patients, form. Forms are the different forms that allow them, and so we'll have edit, where is it, patients, well, let's take a look at edit vitals. I think all of them will show us a similar item. But what's great here is we are actually leveraging and we're able to put that model validation right in here. So let's take a look at edit, the edit vitals form. And as you can see, we've programmed in right away what the error text should be, what it could be, and so forth. So let's also, I want to show you one other control that was quite unique. Now, um, when you're looking at, after the baseline, the first visit, when they come back, we've added this track bar, and this happiness is just something we made up, but it essentially lets them know, the doctors, and you can control it with the mouse, you can control it by clicking on it or the keyboard. But this track bar is a new MVC extension that we had added. But what's interesting about it, it's very easy to implement and add. All right, so with that, I am going to pause now, and we'll take your questions, but let's just do a quick recap before we do that. What we saw today was this clinical study demo. Now, this demo is a departure for DevExpress in many ways because um, it's really, first of all, we chose a vertical. Now, typically we don't like to, just because, it doesn't always apply. You may work in a different field. You're saying, hey, how do I apply this to so-and-so? But I think what's more interesting is to study first study the business logic, but really study the project structure, and then we can see how we can apply this to our own set of projects. And I'll get to your question in just a minute, but what's also interesting is the look. Like I said, for me, this is one of the most interesting looks. It's a new type of interface that we've done, and it's a new type of look. The colors are very soft. The lines run very easily, and because this is our ASP.NET product, it is tablet friendly. So if you run this on a tablet, you may want to increase the button size and stuff, but you'll see it's completely touch responsive, and so that's another great feature of it. And what's also interesting is, you'll find there's a lot of MVC experts out there who will tell you to use things like mocking data, dependency injection, and unit testing. And that was one of our goals by design when we first created this site, that said, listen, we're going to show all of that in here, and it's very easy to do. So my suggestion is that, hey, you can use DevExpress MVC in any manner. And because our MVC extensions are still server-side extensions, meaning that they are full MVC extensions and not just wrappers around lightweight HTML5, JavaScript objects, that they do more, that they provide your end users more features and capabilities. Okay, so you can get this at devexpress.com. And with that, let's pause and I'll take some questions. All right, so, okay, yes, this session is being used. Okay, so Saif has a question. Why did we choose Castle versus Unity? And why also did we go with the Entity Framework? Well, Entity Framework has come a long way. It's actually pretty good now. And so the goal here in choosing all of these frameworks was really that to show it's possible. So Asif, can you take Castle Windsor out of here and use Unity? Absolutely. My recommendation is maybe you want to start with a new project if you're going to do that, though, because sometimes once you make a key decision, it's easier to start a new project sometimes than to completely switch it out from one to the other, right? But it is completely possible. All right. Now this session is being taped, so it will be available afterwards. Hey, we've got some DevExpress customers from Australia. That's awesome. Now, if you have other questions, please feel free to join in. But my main thing is, listen, I will admit, first and foremost, I work with some amazingly smart guys. I am not an expert on ASP.NET. And, a lot of times when we first look at MVC, we'll say, wow, this could be a little bit daunting. How do I even look at a mocking? How do I do dependency injection? you'll find there are great resources out there. As I mentioned, Microsoft themselves have a bunch on their site. In fact, let's look at ASP.NET, MVC. And if you look at, I believe, tutorials, they have a bunch of items in here that you can take a look at that talk about how to do this. In fact, I believe I had a couple of, yeah. And like I said, I'll mention these links in a blog post. They even have a specific one for dependency injection and test-driven development with ASP.NET MVC, where Phil Hack, the former program manager on that product, talks about it. They have a hands-on lab, and this is actually great because you can walk through a hands-on lab, that one that we saw earlier, that talks you through it, and how to inject a controller, injecting into a view and filters. They say it takes about 30 minutes. Maybe you can get through it faster, but it's at your own pace. That's a great way to learn. All right, so we've got some other questions. Muhammad asks, when do you think you'll be adding, say, super forms like the OAuth people? Okay, Muhammad, please, if you could, can you include a link that talks about the super forms? Because unfortunately, I'm not very familiar with it. Sorry for the bad pun, but I'm not very familiar with the OAuth super forms. If you'd like, ping me later afterwards at, let me put up my, let me show you guys the slide for contacting me. Okay, so this is the best way to contact me. DevExpress.com/Mehul. There's a form there. Mehul Harry. You can email Mehul@DevExpress.com. There's a lot of ways to get in touch with me. All right. So Emerson asks, could you comment more on theme creation? If not, give an example on another screencast or at least a blog. Okay, Emerson, I definitely will, and I think it's a topic for a different screencast. The short answer is, what does it? There's a couple ways to create a theme, and the good news is we dog food our own products. We definitely try to. So we're actually working on some new themes for the next release, and man, they're exciting. I can't talk about them yet, but they're definitely looking really good. But what we did was we used this product. Our ASP.NET dev lead is, he's using this exact product which they themselves built. Now, you can create a theme from scratch. My suggestion is open an existing theme. Take an existing theme like the clinical study or so forth. Just point to it. So let's say in this case we will go to computers, see users, public. Let's just say I was going to edit a clinical study one, right? I'm going to go to ASP.NET. I'm going to go to, comment ASP.NET, and then comment under ASP.NET, CS, clinical study site, themes. I apologize. I know this can be a bit boring. So not that one. Go to the themes assembly, point to app themes, and the clinical study. Click that. Point to the app themes folder, then it's going to recognize you have one theme under there called clinical study theme. Click OK. It's going to open this theme and then allow you to have a preview of each one of those items. But let me save this for a different folder. Like I said, I wasn't really planning to show this, and as you can see, it's not quite prepared for it. What I recommend is you can use this theme to open one of our existing DevExpress themes under the same guise. But the idea is that what it does, it lets you see, for example, if it was the grid view, you can see if you click on the row what the CSS is for that, and it lets you edit that and save it back as a theme and use it as a custom theme. So my recommendation is use an existing theme, edit that, because creating one from scratch essentially means you also need to have some images that you might need to. So if you're not a designer, you know, I'm not a designer, and we actually have a great design team. The tool is great. In fact, we even let our designers use this tool to create them. All right. We have some other questions. And if you have more questions, like I said, just email me at mehul@devexpress.com. All right. Saif asks, I was hoping to see more in depth on the use of extensions, especially the menus. Nevertheless, I'll deep dive the same. You know, I, we've gone into the 1 hour mark, and I don't like to go over. So, Saif, you know, like I said, you can ping me directly. What's great about this demo is you can see right from here how we're using the menus. So as you saw, we have a couple of navigational things built into them. We're using the page control, the tab control, the menu, and it's not really hard to even see how we're leveraging them. So for example, under areas, under data capture, you can go to views, you can see under shared exactly what that navigation is, the patient navigation, what buttons we're using, what menus we're using, what tab controls, and so forth. Saif, I promise you, all of this data is there, and it's quite easy to see how we leverage it, and how it's easy enough for you to leverage as well. Oh, okay, so there is a form he's put on. All right, so Mohammed, what I'm going to do is, we ran into the hour, so I am going to come back to you, and I'm gonna email you directly after this session. Okay. Okay. And by the way, Saif did mention there is a video on our TV site that talks about how to edit that. So Emerson, I will follow up with you on that video as well. And finally, I want to say thank you very much for joining. I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions about it, please email me. As I mentioned, you can email me or contact me via Twitter. Follow my blog, please. You know, there's a lot of interesting stuff happening now at DevExpress. You know, we've got this fantastic new library called DXtreme that is client-side. In fact, the team members who created this sample that you're looking at, the clinical study, they are now working on a data visualization that's written completely in JavaScript. So here, let me bring that up. And you can find that at devexpress.com, and I've written about it, and there's some more interesting items coming with it. And I'm hoping to show you how to talk to it via some items like OData and stuff. So, and also how to integrate ASP.NET with our client-side library. But a lot of times people ask me, hey, how do I get ASP.NET to work on mobile? Well, we have a tablet story. I say use our DXtreme client-side library for phones because, I mean, you can use it for phones, for tablets, for desktops. But the reason we don't do ASP.NET for phones, while you can, the reason is large controls like our pivot grid scheduler, you know, other MVC extensions that we have, they're not really meant for phones. They don't really translate well because phones are, you know, you have such a small screen. You have to really rethink what your design is going to look like. Okay. So with that, I will end it. Thank you again for joining us. And let me end by saying that please visit devexpress.com to register for upcoming webinar sessions. We deliver sessions covering all platforms from beginning levels to training to in-depth expert webinars. And our next webinar is October 30th. Now, if you go to support webinars, you'll see on October 30th, we have Deliver Multi-Channel Solutions with DXtreme, with presented by yours truly. And it's about the new DevExpress DX Travel application. This is a multi-channel application that spans across devices and platforms from Windows 8 to the iPad and to the iPhone and Android smartphones. And in this webinar, I will cover and show you how it was built using the new DXtreme HTML framework. We're also going to take a look at its architecture, HTML, JavaScript widgets, and how to get started with it. So we're going to actually take a look and build an iPhone and Windows 8 platform channels, meaning so you'll actually see how to leverage this for your own solutions. So JavaScript beginners are encouraged to attend. And like I said, so it's really an interesting new product, and I welcome everyone in the web space, including ASP.NET, if you're in the web space, you'll want to see this. It seems like JavaScript has taken over the world, and so DevExpress has a unique approach to it that I think is very interesting. So thank you again. Thank you for joining us, and let's see what develops.